This week's episode of the EWA Radio podcast is sponsored by the Collaborative for Student Success. EWA maintains all editorial control over the content. This is EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. And I'm joined today by our other public editor, Kavitha Cardoza.
Hi, Emily.
Thanks for doing this, Kavitha.
My pleasure. It kind of feels odd not to be hosting after a year.
Well, I wrestled the mic away from you and chased you out of the recording studios. You don't really have a choice, do you? No, it's a very friendly coup.
Absolutely. We're so glad you're back.
I'm glad to be back. It's exciting. Having the time away after more than a decade as public editor was a great break for me to focus on some other projects, and super grateful to the Spencer Education Fellowship at Columbia University for that opportunity. And for anybody who may be considering something like that, a special project, education related you want to do, I recommend you check out the Spencer. And you were Spencer as well, Kavitha, so you know firsthand.
Yes, I absolutely endorse everything you're saying about it.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit as we hand back the mic and this transition, just some takeaways from your year as public editor. I thought it would be interesting for people to hear a little bit about some of the work that you did and what you've learned. What were some of the highlights for you this year?
Definitely some of the highlights were meeting education reporters from across the country, like so many awesome ed reporters. I don't think I realized the scale before this. And I also loved being able to make connections. So, for example, I remember speaking with Skylar Rispens, who had got laid off. She was in Montana, and Montana doesn't have an education reporter full-time now. I reached out and I said, hey, are you thinking of moving? Where are you open to moving to? And she said, I think I want to stay in Montana. I think I want to start a kind of education collaborative because we should have education reporting in Montana. And I thought, absolutely, it's so important. And I was able to introduce her to other people who have formed collaboratives or who have been the only ed reporter in their state. And something like that was fantastic.
It's incredible to think about a state the size of Montana, and granted, a lot of that is open space, not having an education reporter. I'm so glad that you were able to be there for that transition, and Skylar's a terrific EWA member, and we wish her the best with that new endeavor. It's interesting what you say about the scale and the scope, because I don't think I realized until I'd been in this for a while how many people are education reporters, maybe just for a couple of years, or maybe for 4 years, or maybe for 10 years, and go on to do other things, but somehow get pulled back into the beat, and how deep those roots are. How many people I know now who are doing incredible things on other beats, but carry that EWA and that education beat experience with them.
I remember I had a conversation with Topher Smith from ProPublica, and I was teasing him and saying, it's like a Marine, once an education reporter, always an education reporter.
I love it.
You look at it through that lens, and he said he definitely does. I will mention another thing that I thought was so cool, Emily, when we talk about awesome reporters. Katie Kokel from the Palm Beach Post. And, there've been layoffs for ages. This person decided, I want to do something about it, right? So she created this project where she developed a kind of prototype. If there are layouts, what are some of the ways you can reach journalists? Who needs direct help in terms of cash or a place to stay, networking opportunities? And she created this kind of prototype, and now it's being used in places across the country. And I remember her saying, when I reached out to her when she first started this, and she said, education reporters and sports reporters are the most affected. And to see this project that is now being used in other communities was so amazing. This is an EWA member. It was fantastic to be able to speak to people like that.
That's an amazing highlight. That's incredible. Are there any other highlights you want to mention?
There were just so many, I don't want to to single out people and then leave out people because then I'll feel
No.
awful.
Yeah.
But I will say, being able to be there at some of the lowest points of people's career, this may not be a highlight for some people, but having been laid off myself, being able to be there and to reassure people and to help with connections or information or just reassurance, I felt it was such a privilege that people let me into their lives at that moment. And now, kind of coming full circle and seeing some people whom I spoke to at the beginning of my year thriving, they have new jobs, they're doing fantastic work, or they did fantastic work as freelancers, and just being back on their feet and confident again. And now I can reach out to them and say, hey, I've just heard someone's laid off. Can you speak to them? Because, I've spoken to them, but it means so much more coming from you. And I think that was amazing. I'm very grateful.
I got into journalism because it was a helping profession. And my favorite part about being public editor is that opportunity to connect with our members and to help them when they need us most. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a favorite episode of EWA Radio you want to mention for folks maybe listening or haven't listened in a couple of months who want to catch up? Is there something you want them to make sure they hear?
When someone asks me what my favorite story is that I've written, I always say it's always the next one. Once you've done it, it's almost like you've learned something, it's like really precious, and then you send it out to the world and you're on to the next thing. I will say, in terms of EWA episodes, again, I don't want to leave guests out, but I am very proud of the evergreens. We did one on what happens after you're laid off. It was full of very practical steps. Mental health, I did that as my final episode because I thought that was really important. And I did one on moderating, had a panel and we talked about how to be an effective moderator. And I think I kind of feel like those evergreens that you can keep coming back to are really helpful. And I think I would say those are my favorites.
Well, I'm glad you did those evergreens for a couple of reasons. One, more people will hear your dulcet tones. And second, you have a very natural way of interviewing people in a very conversational style that I've always admired. And I've talked about this. When I listen to Raising Kings Project on NPR, for example, and when you're on the bus with the students and just conversing with them and letting them be themselves, and you seem to have a way of getting people to relax quickly. And I admire that. But I do think for the evergreen episodes, those are really important topics. And I was very grateful to see you do that. So thank you, Kavitha.
Oh, I'm also hoping you can use them during like vacation so you can take some time off, Emily, and have a vacation.
I don't think I should be thinking or talking about time off, having just come back from a wonderful leave. But yes, I will bookmark that and I will take that under advisement. I'm wondering, Kavitha, what do you know now that you didn't know a year ago about the education beat? Anything surprise you?
Yes, I will say I had no idea just how political it had become. And also, I live in DC, which everyone thinks of as the political capital. But in terms of just the school system here, it's a very liberal school system, an area, really, this whole area. But hearing from reporters from across the country about mental health issues they were dealing with and the vicious, awful attacks, being doxxed, people screaming at them at school board meetings, needing a police escort to cover school board meetings, vicious emails or tweets or threads on neighborhood listservs. It just felt like the political atmosphere is just so toxic right now. And in some states, our education reporters are really, really feeling that heat. I think editors have not kind of quite wrapped their arms around it or realized, so they can't help. I think that's in part why people were reaching out to the public editor. I really think that's something we need to keep an eye on because it can only get worse as the election season ramps up. And so the need for mental health for journalists, yes, but specifically for education journalists, because I think this was a beat where I think political reporters, it's like, oh yeah, they were expecting that. But people have gone into education reporting like not expecting that. And because I had been out of daily education reporting for the last few years, I did not realize what it was like and what reporters were having to deal with. So I think that's an ongoing issue that I'm very concerned about.
Has the experience of being public editor changed the way you think at all about your own work as an education journalist?
I think it's definitely made me feel more proud of my education reporting, made me feel it's critical. What we do is critical and we can't stop. It is not a beat that should be seen as a starter beat, as an afterthought beat. It is, we are way up there with the election season, like political reporting. Education reporting is always seen as one of the most important topics in communities, and yet it hasn't shared that same status. I have often heard from reporters who will say they cover education and they are bearing the brunt of all this. But when it comes to interviewing political candidates or speaking on behalf of the news organization or things like that, it's always other reporters from other beats who are given that spotlight. And I really would like to see education reporters taking the spotlight, because this is one of the most important issues we are facing. Um, I think not so much on the public editor, because I have taught for many years, and I think you learn while teaching that you have to break it down, you have to simplify, you kind of have to go back and say, like, well, how do I know to call that person? Or what are the steps I took? And think of that. I did definitely learn about how journalists of color, education journalists of color, have very different issues. Like I said, I haven't been a beat reporter for the last couple of years. But something like, we've all learned this in J school, oh, knock on doors. Well, I would never give that advice to a young reporter now, especially to a young journalist of color. It's just, don't knock on doors, especially in the evening after people have come home from work. It's just not safe. We're in a whole different environment.
My gosh, what an important point. I was thinking about this, especially when I was on leave and we were seeing absolutely horrific stories of gun violence happening, mistaken identity, people pulling into the wrong driveway. Kavitha, I cannot count how many times I have pulled into the wrong driveway as a journalist.
Oh my gosh, I've knocked on doors where I don't know where a person lives and said, hey, do you know the neighbor so and so, or whatever. I remember one shouted out, I was in a complex and I was searching for the door and knocking on doors. It was in a sketchy part of DC, and someone shouted out, no, they're either a social worker or they're a Jehovah's Witness. And I kind of laughed. And now I think things have really changed. You can't just do that. A lot of things, I think journalism schools need to rethink how we pass down information and reporting practices, because I think a lot of it is from a very white perspective, and people have not thought of that privilege. And also, times have really changed. And so, our new education reporters, or our younger education reporters, it's a much more diverse field. And there are some things that are just simply not safe anymore. I'm hoping education journalist professors are listening to this. And I think we need to rethink some of that previous wisdom, because we just don't do it like that anymore.
We're talking with Kavitha Cardoza as she wraps up her tenure as EWA's public editor, and I take the mic back. EWA Radio is sponsored by the Collaborative for Student Success. Join the Collaborative for Student Success this summer on the Route K-12 podcast, where director Jim Cowan travels the country showcasing the ways federal recovery funds are reshaping schools. Guests include education commissioners, district superintendents, teachers, parents, and other folks who are helping to shape the future of schools. Listen in to hear insights and information that could help improve education where you live, and hopefully have some fun along the way. Look out for new episodes of the Route K-12 Exploring Education Recovery podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Kavitha, you brought a lot of skills to this job, and I'm hoping you're taking some new ones away with you. What might some of those be?
So I will say all credit to my EWA colleagues. I mean, they are just amazing. And I will say Lori Crouch, my manager, a lot of people know her. And she said to me one day, Kavitha, we've got this big project on data privacy. We'd like you to kind of spearhead. And I was like, oh, Lori, I don't know anything about data privacy. Like, isn't it a technology reporter thing? Like, why is it an education thing? And she kind of laughed and said, well, do some research. And the more I researched, the more it became such a huge part of my year. And like, I'm almost like an evangelist that education reporting has to include technology and has to include student data privacy and things like that. Education reporting is technology reporting and vice versa. There are bits that don't overlap, obviously, but it's a critical piece to understand. And so I'm so grateful to her for kind of getting me out of my comfort zone, because that is one of the most fun parts of this year, is when I really stretched myself and met a whole different group of journalists that I didn't know before, I didn't interact with before, who have just made my life so much richer. I want to shout out Angelina Liu and CD Davidson Hires. Both of them do a lot with social media and outreach, and whether we were trying to recruit for fellowships or for different seminars or caucuses, they know so much about it. It was really cool to see what they know and kind of learn from them. And they're both about 20 years younger than I am. And I was just so delighted. And they've been amazing, fun colleagues. Everyone has been awesome at EWA, but I work the most closely with both of them, and I've learned so much from them.
Well, I want to learn from you. So, what advice do you have for me as I step back into this role?
Oh my gosh. I would say buckle up. There's just so much to do. I really think, Emily, I had so underestimated the political aspect of this. I mean, we thought of like debates around the Common Core, No Child Left Behind, and stuff like that as being like terribly political. And this is just a whole different level. I cannot say that or stress that enough. With the elections coming up, I really think you are going to be at the forefront of the intersection between politics and education, or the overlap between politics and education. And I think you're going to be hearing a lot from reporters about non education related stuff, or just not the content area, but a lot of outside the content area issues. And I think I don't have advice for you, Emily. You've done this for ages. You taught me. Like, no, we've overlapped for about a month, and you are just doing a spectacular job as always. I mean, I do have to say, as a reporter myself, I reached out to you as public editor so many times, and you helped me. And so, we'll be back to that soon.
Can you share any of your plans for the near future if people want to follow what you're doing?
I don't know that I have any plans. I've been so steeped in national seminar, I kind of haven't been looking for anything or thinking of anything else. And now that the time has come, my mom is coming to visit, which is super exciting to me. She hasn't come to the US for 8 years. And so she's coming to visit. And so I'm going to take time off and just really relax. I'm still wrapping up some stuff with EWA, so I'll be working on individual projects. So while I won't be part of the whole team as yet, I'll still be doing some work. I will always be a booster for ed reporters, and I will continue to tweet and uplift work, which I think is outstanding, because I really think that's so, so important. And that's something that I will definitely take away from this year that I think will go with me forever. I think I'm looking for meaningful work. I have some projects I'm working on, like freelance projects. And I think I would say that my plan is to do meaningful work that I am proud of. And as and when anything happens, I will definitely post on social media. No one is getting rid of me.
Well, I thank the Spencer Fellowship at the top of the show, because without them, my leave wouldn't have been possible. And frankly, Kavitha, it wouldn't have been nearly as fruitful for me professionally or emotionally if I didn't know that the public editor reins were in such terrific, talented hands. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Well, part of the reason I stepped in as public editor was because at the end of my Spencer year, I was so busy with my project, I had not thought of, oh, what's next? So when I heard about this, it was like, yeah, I don't have anything lined up. And it turned out to be such meaningful work, which I am so proud of. As you can tell, I'm not very good at planning my life. But I am so grateful for the opportunity from Caroline Henry. I'm a huge fan, our former EWA executive director, and you for this opportunity. I have really, really enjoyed it.
Is there any questions you have for me before we sign off?
Yes. Actually, I was going to
Yeah.
ask, can I ask you a
Yeah.
question? So, you've talked a little bit about your Spencer year and how meaningful it was. What did you do?
I was focused on researching and reporting on the Department of Defense's public schools, known as the Department of Defense Education Activity, which is children being educated on military bases, both in the United States and abroad. So I'm kind of fascinated with those schools and with that population. They are the closest thing we have really to a federal school system in that they're 100% federally funded by Congress, not gathering any kind of local revenue or taxes, and they are fascinating enclaves. And as you know, you have reported on those schools yourselves for a radio series for WAMU.
Hmm. Well, I wanted, if it's okay, Emily, if we could end with two questions I started incorporating in every EWA episode.
I would love it.
One is, if you would like to shout out your editors of the past year. I feel oftentimes reporters grumble a lot about editors, and I definitely do. But I feel like we don't get a lot of opportunity to shout out editors for a lot of our awards. Oftentimes the editors who have done a huge amount of work on the project don't actually get credit, or they're not, that's just the way the organization works. And so, are there any editors you would like to shout out?
That's a great question. So, to be honest, I've been reporting so heavily on this project through Spencer that the people who get the biggest shout outs would be my Spencer advisors and professors. So, Lynn L. Hancock at the Spencer program at Columbia has been a fantastic resource. Hugely grateful to Ainsley Erickson, also at Columbia. She's an education historian. She's provided me with a great reading list and great support. Doug Reddy, who runs the Education Research Center at Columbia, also has been phenomenal. And then also my editors at the Hechinger Report, who I'll be working with on some of the pieces that I'm reporting out from my travels this past year. So that would be Liz Willen. And she's been in my corner from day one and just a phenomenal resource.
And then the other question that I've started incorporating is, I really believe that when we do like deeply reported stories, or when we spend a lot of time on a project, we are changed like forever in a tiny way, and people we interview are changed forever in a tiny way. And I was wondering, what is the lesson that you've taken away from this year that is not just for today or tomorrow or next year? It's like forever. You will always have that life lesson.
The first life lesson, believe it or not, I think is a very personal one, which is that I'm braver than I thought. This was the first time that I'd done an overseas reporting trip by myself. I had traveled, of course, extensively. I've traveled by myself, but I had never gone overseas on a reporting trip. And it was daunting. I ended up renting a car and driving over 1,000 miles and visiting 7 military installations, which just was really a challenge for me logistically before I could even get to the work that I thought I knew how to do, which was the reporting. So being braver than I thought I could ever be, that's definitely going to stay with me. The other thing I would say that would stay with me is a reaffirmation of how much of this job is about trust. Teachers are allowing you into their classrooms to watch them work and consciously or subconsciously to draw judgments on that. What other job really is there where so much of your reporting depends on that kind of a trust relationship? We don't go and stand behind a surgeon and then write about whether they picked up the right scalpel. Those kinds of things simply don't happen the way that we expect to become part of an education space. And just by being there, we change that community, which makes it a risk for the people who are allowing you in. So that kind of a trust relationship that has to be there for you to get access to a school and to a classroom. We complain a lot about all of the gatekeepers and all the barriers that are up, and certainly that's only gotten worse. But if you want to bring down those barriers, the best thing you can do is to build as much trust in your work and faith in yourself as you can, and those barriers will hopefully come down.
If I was doing the interview, Emily, I would end right here.
And if I'm doing the interview, which I am, I'm going to end right here. Kavitha, wishing the very best. You can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much.
And that wraps it up for us at EWA Radio. This week's episode was sponsored by the Collaborative for Student Success. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education journalists and improve the quality of education coverage. For more than 75 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, take good care of yourselves, and thank you for listening.